Hello, in this video for my law and economics class I'll be talking about monopolies today. So first let's start with what a monopoly is. A pure monopoly can be defined as a single firm that produces a product with no close substitutes in an industry in which significant barriers to entry prevent other firms from competing for profits. So in a monopoly, the monopolistic firm comprises the entire industry. Next let's talk about barriers to entry. Barriers to entry prevent new firms from entering an industry and competing for its profits. The first form of barriers to entry I'm going to talk about are government franchises, which is when the government directs a certain firm to become a monopoly and does not allow other firms to enter the industry. Next are patents, which are legal documents that grant exclusive use of the patented item or process specifically to the patent holder. Next are economies of scale, which is when industries with large capital requirements prevent would-be entrants from entering the industry due to the size of the initial investment. Finally is ownership of a scarce factor of production, which is when one firm owns an entire supply of a factor of production necessary to produce a certain item. It then controls the entire industry and no other firms can enter. A monopoly has social costs to society. It produces an inefficient mix of output, and so the price is above marginal cost, which causes a welfare loss for society because it is seen as overcharging and underproducing from society's point of view. Next, let's talk about types of monopoly. The first type of monopoly is a natural monopoly, which is an industry with such large economies of scale and production that production by a single firm is most efficient for society. An example of this is the railroad industry. It would be very expensive for multiple railroad companies to lay tracks across the country, and so it is more efficient for the consumer for there to be one large railroad company. The next type of monopoly is a state monopoly, which is a monopoly created by the government where it is illegal for others to compete in the industry. An example of this is the Postal Service. The next example of a monopoly is a cartel, which is when small firms make a deal to keep the prices up and the quantity down, so they effectively function as one monopoly. And this works as long as all of the firms within the cartel cooperate, because there is an incentive to cheat in order to beat the other firms, which then become seen as competition. An example of this is the vitamin industry in Europe in the 1990s, which was convicted of price fixing. And finally, the last form of monopoly is an artificial monopoly, which is a very big firm that is not a natural monopoly. And since it has more money than small firms, it can sell below cost to drive them out of the industry. But this can't be maintained because the big firm loses money fast by selling below cost. Next, we're going to talk about antitrust law. And so the first antitrust legislation in the United States was the Sherman Antitrust Law, which was introduced to Congress in 1890, and this outlawed any contract, combination, or conspiracy in restraint of trade, and also made monopolizing or attempting to monopolize a market illegal. Attempting to form any kind of monopoly is a felony, and AT&T and Microsoft were both charged with attempting to form a monopoly in 1984 and 2001 respectively. AT&T was split up into smaller companies, and Microsoft was required to share its software with a third party and appoint a panel to ensure compliance. And finally, the Clayton Act, which is another form of antitrust legislation, was introduced to Congress in 1914, and it limits the undertakings meant to lessen competition substantially or create a monopoly, and it prohibits price discrimination. Thank you.